larger goats large dogs that are allowed here in the city. And so they're smaller, and also they're a lot less quiet. I mean, they baa for sure, but their baas aren't as loud as a lot of dog barks. So I was just kind of going over maybe the different concerns that people may have. And so, yeah, they're quieter than large dogs, and even small dogs that bark real loud, and they're smaller than a lot of large dogs here in the city. Some people have a misconception that goats are really stinky, but if they have a really good diet, they're not. And actually, they're a lot less invasive. I don't know if it's because they're vegetarians and dogs are carnivores, but in terms of that types of smell, they're a lot less invasive. So just want to express that opinion and let you, I think that'd be a great addition to the beautiful ambience here of North Ogden, to maybe allow maybe 1 or 2 pygmy goats. Obviously, you wouldn't want herds of goats, or packs of dogs. So I'm sure there's ordinances there. I haven't looked into the dog ordinances, but I just wanted to let y'all know that I think it'd be great if we allowed a goat or 2 in the residential areas here in North Ogden. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Aaron Christensen, 2428 Barker Parkway. Mayor Chugg and council members, tonight you'll be discussing the sound at the Amphitheater at Barker Park. Parks and Recreation Department provided a staff report to each of you requesting adjustment of rules adopted by the council last year to govern use of the amphitheater. If you remember, in adopting those rules, there was a dialogue about times and activities in an effort to minimize the impact on surrounding homes. There's a good reason for those existing restrictions and for similar restrictions recognized citywide. Our city code deals with nuisances, referring to Utah Code 76-10-801. Sound is regulated as a nuisance and is addressed under the Health and Sanitation section of North Ogden City Code. Sound is often regulated by the Health Department as noise is recognized as influencing the health and well-being of citizens. The current sound ordinance governing the rest of the city of North Ogden specifies protected hours to be 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. That code addresses multiple sources of noise, again, in part because noise affects health and well-being. The Parks and Rec Department wants you to amend the existing ordinance to exempt entertainment and other city-sponsored activities from the rules that govern the rest of the city, essentially saying the city doesn't have to abide by the same rules. Quote, so that our residents can enjoy, unquote, movies in the park. The report claims industry-wide movies in the park begin at dusk. So I called an entity. The first one I called was the Davis Arts Council, who runs the Leighton Amphitheater's movies in the park. I was told they start at 6:30 with an activity and then 7:30 with a movie so they can wrap up by 10. Then I spoke with the Leighton City Attorney's Office, who told me their government has to abide the same rules as the private citizens and commercial entities in their city when it comes to noise. There's a process to apply for variance on an event-by-event case, but it's involved enough that not even the city utilizes that process per their report. They don't have 2 sets of rules. Now, I understand that they likely have different projection equipment that we currently lack in our city, and I'm not suggesting we purchase expensive equipment to allow an annual quartet of movies in the park. I'm simply pointing out that industry-wide is a pretty broad brush, and it's not a good argument for abandoning protections we have in place. Again, the Parks and Rec Department wants to run later than times allowed throughout the rest of the city so residents can enjoy movies in the park and other city-sponsored events. This fails to acknowledge that residents include citizens living around Barker Park who are negatively affected by the request to allow later activities. In this, the Parks and Rec Department is asking you as the council to prioritize entertainment over the health and well-being of adjacent citizens. They're also furthering the notion that the city can do what it wants rather than abide by the same rules as citizens. North Ogden City is better than that, and I ask you not to give in to that request. As written, the rules governing hours of use of amphitheater at Barker Park resemble regulations throughout the rest of the city with a couple of allowances. They do allow activities to run to 10 p.m., then patrons need to exit the facility. That is less restrictive than limitations in other parks, as code states it's unlawful for a person other than a peace officer on duty or a public employee or officer in the discharge of his official duties to be in or about any park within the corporate limits of the city after the hour of 10 o'clock p.m. So we're already allowing patrons to stay longer than the law allows in other city parks. Tonight, I'm not asking you to give special allowance to our neighborhood, but simply asking that you maintain the standards set throughout the rest of the city. If noise after 10 p.m. is designated a nuisance in one residential neighborhood, then it should be designated a nuisance in another residential neighborhood. More specifically, noise from my speaker or the city-sponsored speaker should be treated equally. If noise from my backyard is deemed a nuisance after 10 p.m., then noise in my front yard or across the street in the park is a nuisance after 10 p.m. As recognized by our city code, sound does not stop at the property line. Movies in the park or other city-sponsored activities may be fun for some citizens, but they are an entertainment, a want, and should not be prioritized over health and well-being, a need of surrounding citizens. It may mean no movies in the park for now, but wanting to show a movie does not justify altering the rules due to poor planning on the department's part, nor does it justify opening the door with loosening restrictions on other city-sponsored events. With this in mind, I respectfully ask that you deny the Parks and Recreation Department's request to alter the hours of operation at the amphitheater. Thank you.
Thank you. May we have a copy of your document? Thanks very much.
I'm Brian Bartholomew, 3712 Nebo Avenue here in North Ogden. I'm not as prepared as Aaron, but it's been a while since I've come and squawked at you guys, so here I am again. I was just giving some information. I just wanted to throw some questions really out to you guys as it's a budget night. One of my questions is, well, a couple of them regarding the amphitheater. As I recall, $800,000 was borrowed from the general fund when that was going to be repaid, and I'm wondering if that has been repaid. In this North Ogden budget hearing information, it says that the amphitheater has budgeted $378,000, so almost $400,000 is on the budget for this year. And my question is, well, a couple questions there. Are we still in violation of the protective ordinance for the homes on that street regarding the amphitheater? And if we are, has that been addressed, or have those issues been resolved? And then if we're going to be putting more money into this, looking at these other capital projects, looks like it's kind of a list of wants. Some things may be considered needs, but the very next page it talks about increasing our utility rates. And if we've got $400,000 extra to throw at a toy, which is essentially what the amphitheater is, why are we raising utility rates? I mean, there's got to be money extra. There's extra money somewhere, obviously, since that's where we're pulling it for a toy. I think if we have that kind of money laying around, we shouldn't be raising utility rates. That's really my comments for now. So thank you. Oh, and Mr. Swanson, I'm still waiting for lunch with you, man. I'd like to go.
Thank you for your comment.
There, Mayor, City Council. Jonathan Call, the good-looking one, came back. 1895 North, 300 East for the time being. So I've been gone a while. It's been a bit since you guys heard from me. I'm back, and I just want to let you know what I heard. You know what I heard? Goats. All right. Tough crowd. I've been practicing dad jokes, and I guess I need more practice. I wanted to address a couple things, but first I wanted to say thanks for the City Council members who stayed in touch with me while I was gone serving overseas, and the Planning Commission members that were in touch with me as well concerning the property near my home and the developments going on there. So I appreciate the support and the communication, and we really do have the best, in my opinion, the best City Council and Mayor in the state of Utah. You guys are awesome. So that being said, about 2015 was when we first talked about dogs, and now the dogs are back on the agenda. I wanted to talk about the dog park. When we first brought the dog park subject up, city council and a lot of members in the city, or citizens in the city, had questions. They didn't think that the dog park would be used, so we put minimal resources towards it. We formed a dog park council, and all volunteers. We came up with some solutions to make a really low budget dog park. We put it in a retention basin that had an existing fence, all kind of under the assumption that this was just going to be a temporary thing while we felt out how successful a dog park would be in North Ogden. I think we've shown that the dog park has been used quite a bit. Lots of comments about the lack of parking there, some of the safety issues of its current location being right on 2600. But I think we've shown that it's used and it's appreciated and it's taken care of. I'd ask that the city council consider possibly finding a more permanent location or a better location or better suited location for a dog park in the future. Concerning the item of discussion for later, the number of dogs a homeowner can have, I think it's a great idea that we could have 3 dogs. I've got 2. I love having 2 dogs. Don't know that I would get a 3rd dog, but quite honestly, I don't care how many dogs my neighbors have, as long as they're responsible dog owners. They can have 1 dog and be a terrible dog owner and be a huge nuisance, and that would bother me more than a neighbor with 5 dogs that actually takes care of them and picks up after them and keeps them from barking. So, goats, I think it'd be awesome to have a goat. I think pygmy goats are really cool. My kids think they're cool. But once again, it's all in the types of neighbors you have. You could have neighbors that are within the ordinance, the 2 acres or whatever, but they take terrible care of the yard. I don't know if there's ways to address that, but I would be in support of increasing the number of dogs to 3 and having pygmy goats. So, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Council.
Thank you for your comment. Seeing no other comments, we'll move on with the agenda. Discussion and action to consider an ordinance on commercial building orientation and utility structures. Our presenter will be Rob Scott, our planning director.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, audience. The Planning Commission has been working diligently when it comes to looking at standards for our commercial projects within the city, as you are well aware. And as a part of that, the ordinances that are in place today in many ways are outdated and need to be updated. As you will be voting on, my understanding is that you're considering providing funding for updating all of our city codes. And as such, that'll be an important project, especially from a planning perspective relative to the zoning ordinance and also the subdivision ordinance, which the proposal has been that they be combined into one ordinance, a land development code. The Planning Commission, as they have reviewed various projects along the way, have noticed that there are certain ordinances in place that do not accomplish a couple of things. First of all, they do not provide sufficient flexibility in reviewing site plans to be able to recognize that there are unique circumstances within various project locations. And as such, the standards that we have in place in many instances do not provide any opportunity to make any adjustments. So the Planning Commission, as we've been working together on these ordinances and what have you, have referenced those concerns, and particularly our city entrances, the entryways to our city. What are the images that we project for the projects that are immediately on our boundaries? So our general plan has many strategies and goals associated with promoting and enhancing our city appearances, the various streetscapes, building locations, interests, transit and excellent pedestrian connections, also improving streetscapes. It's mentioned many times throughout our general plan. As such, the Planning Commission has asked planning staff along the way to address certain of these standards. And so this is one of those ordinances this evening that is before you to consider. So the Planning Commission first discussed this back in May. As far as this particular ordinance, there was a public hearing held this last week on June 5th, and there are 5 component parts to this particular ordinance as far as ordinance standards are concerned. One is building orientation. The second one is loading facilities, trash enclosures, windows, and utility meters. So some of this is somewhat mundane. Some of this is actually going to be very helpful as far as providing for some standards associated with these types of things. So the first one, it has to do with building entrances. And this particular standard is one that we borrowed from our master plan community zone, and we have adapted it to our own commercial ordinances. So the suggestion is that be a requirement that building facades should provide at least one operable functioning building entrance per elevation that faces a public street. In other words, that we don't have back-facing projects on our streets, that we have an image and a projection of this is an entryway to the building from our streets. The second thing is that it provides the flexibility that if the project happens to be on a corner, that requirement could be satisfied by just placing one entrance at the corner of the building. So you wouldn't have to have 2 entrances in that instance. There was a lot of discussion in terms of situations where we have drive-up windows and what have you. And the Planning Commission ultimately decided to recommend the ordinance. We did not have some language that addressed that, but I've given you some, and it's in the blue that, as I mentioned, gives flexibility. In the case where the Planning Commission does not require a reduced front setback, the Planning Commission may adjust the number and locations of building entrances. So again, being responsive to the overall vision of the project as well as meeting city needs, giving the Planning Commission some authority to deal with that situation. It also requires that if there's going to be a commercial center, that there be a master plan that incorporates the design for the entire project as opposed to piecemealing it one building at a time. So there's some other situations in here. Sub 1, that particular phrase actually is in our ordinances today. It's actually in our subdivision ordinance, which is kind of a strange place for it to be. It does talk about subdivisions, but it's important to recognize that there needs to be an overall vision and that all of the site plan considerations should be considered as part of a master plan. There's some standards about access and parking. There's also a standard where if we have commercial that's next to residential, that also be considered. In terms of loading facilities, trash enclosures, and windows, those again, we have various standards associated with those. These standards identify how those should be accomplished. Our standards currently are that those are not to be included in any rear of any buildings, and this gives the flexibility of the Planning Commission to, in an overall design, look at those. Same thing with trash enclosures. Windows is a sort of a new one. This is also borrowed from our MPC zone. It's about our entryways so we don't have blank walls as part of looking at projects. Last but not least, there's a situation where we've had some utility meters that have been put out in the front next to our street frontages. The one that comes to mind is the Beans and Brew project. The first thing you see is the utility meters instead of looking at the building. So this basically requires those utility meters to be screened and placed away from the public right-of-way. So these ordinances, and there are more to come relative to this, is a nice start to be able to have some standards where the Planning Commission can review those and make them a part of their site plan review process. So I'd be happy to answer questions. They unanimously have recommended this be adopted.
Rob, on the utilities, have the utility companies, are they, I mean, because I know they have some strict ordinances and parameters we have to adhere to. Some of them, you know, that depends on the entity, but some of them can't be blocked or, you know, can't have a fence around them. Some of them, Rocky Mountain Power tells you this is where you have to put your transformer. I mean, some of these I could see that could be a challenge with some of this, the wording in there. Has that been discussed, or what was?
Well, the idea there is that they have to be away from the public street. So it's a matter of locating them somewhere on the property other than out as part of the frontage. So.
Okay, again, there are times Rocky Mountain Power says this is where I'm putting it. You know,
you know what? It's time for the city to be the one that's in control and not the utilities.
And I love that point. And I love that point, but you know how Rocky Mountain Power can be. And
we met with them today, and I think they're very cooperative when
Okay,
it comes to these kinds of things. We didn't specifically talk about this ordinance, but I know that there's a real sense of wanting to be cooperative with the city.
good, and I'm glad to hear that, because
Yeah.
that can be difficult at times. So I'm not picking on Rocky Mountain Power specifically. There's other entities out there too. So.
I think this is a good start. Again, we'll have an opportunity, a second bite at the apple when it comes to these other revised ordinances and what have you as they come along. But I think these are a good start as far as these amendments that are being proposed.
I got a quick. Oh, go ahead. If I'm understanding, so is this buildings have to face Washington 2550, 2700? So what about in a situation like Lee's parking lot, where the buildings face inside, they have to have two fronts? So like, what's Pizza Hut, that strip mall, there's that wedding dress place, I can't remember, haircuts, they all have to
Faces
have.
2700.
Yeah, but they face into the parking lot because you park, but we need the front now on 2700 as well.
So that's the reason for B, is to give some flexibility to the
Okay.
Planning Commission to actually address that very issue.
Okay.
Yep.
Rob, I had a question on setbacks, looking at this, and it's somewhat similar to the form-based code that we chose not to follow here a couple of weeks ago. In this, I didn't see anything where we're forcing the buildings to be a certain distance from the road or anything like that. Is that correct?
There's a minimum of 20 feet, but it gives the flexibility of the Planning Commission to address that as part of
So
the
it could
site
be
plan.
further back if they wanted a parking lot in front, as long as
That's the minimum, or it could be less than that too.
Okay.
It could be right up to the sidewalk, or
the
I
parking could
shouldn't
be
say
in front, it
sidewalk.
could be in back, as long as
Yep.
the frontage of the store is towards the major street.
Correct.
And council, I think it also, one thing it does is it focuses on kind of like the commercial master plan. So it'll all be kind of worked out in the beginning, even if it's, hey, here's where we have a pad that's going in. We don't know what it'll be, but this is the approximate size and space. This is how traffic will move. And this is why it makes sense to orient the building here or move it here. Or so it allows some, we're hoping some flexibility, so that we end up with attractive buildings in our commercial area. Not that we haven't been getting attractive buildings, but just some of our ordinances have caused some problems for some developers, and we're just trying to hold to the line of we want it to look nice, but also be willing to work with the commercial developers in the city.
One of the things that I've stressed when I've met with various applicants and what have you is that the message I have received from this council has been loud and clear that you really want quality development. And to me, this is a step forward in the right direction.
How would the car wash that we're building right now fit with this? Not so well? I'm just curious because UDOT only gives us so many access points, so when you have to build like a little frontage road.
Well, remember, this ordinance applies to the C1 and C2 zones.
So not the MPC zone.
The MPC zone, it does not apply to that. It
Makes
has
sense.
its own standards, and it allows a lot of flexibility in and of itself. So in a sense, it is consistent with that.
Okay. So hypothetically, when 2700 gets developed and it goes MPC, this wouldn't, we'll work with them at that time.
Well, and your point's well taken, because as part of MPCs, there is a requirement for an overall site plan and master plan to be produced as part of that kind of a request.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a nice parallel.
Any other questions or discussion?
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate the. There's no other questions or discussion. I would entertain a motion.
What's the ordinance number?
2019-09.
Mayor, I'd move that we approve ordinance 2019-09 on commercial building orientation and utility structures as discussed and presented by Rob Scott.
It's been moved by Councilman Swanson to approve ordinance number 2019-09, the commercial building orientation and utility structures as discussed by Mr. Rob Scott, our planning director.
I second that.
And seconded by Councilwoman Stoker. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll begin the voting with Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Barker,
Yes.
Councilman Severin,
Yes.
Councilman Turner. Motion passes.
Thank you very much, Council. The next step, we've been talking about our streetscape standards. That's coming to you here in a couple weeks at long last. So we're excited to bring that to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item of discussion or action to consider a resolution adopting the employee salary ranges and job titles. Presenter will be Annette Spenlove, City Recorder, HR Director.
Mayor and Council, you've asked us to evaluate salary ranges based on market analysis and several factors, including job titles, and we've done that this year. I use a software program from TechnologyNet that is updated through communities' compensation, similar to ours, in a certain mile, in a certain radius, and we went 75 miles, considering where our employees would go how far they would move to get a new job. Anyway, before you is a resolution, and you've got those salary ranges. Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Councilman Swanson.
Not a question. I don't think it matters, but I did notice that police officer 1 was on there twice. The salary ranges matched. They were exactly the same, but I did notice that it was on there twice.
Thank you.
You can pick and choose which one you want.
So you can be a police officer 1 or a police officer 1. Okay.
Yes, I can delete one of those.
I didn't know if it mattered.
Any other questions or discussion?
Mayor, can I say something? So, council, as you know, two of the council members and the mayor sat down with Annette to work on these ranges, and then evaluate employees, and that's, this year we took department heads out of it just because of the where the numbers were trending, and so we just so you know, I believe it was Councilwoman Stoker and Councilman Severing who kind of came and talked to you about that, but this is essentially their work and what Annette and them put together based on that technology net server that there's I couldn't tell you how many cities exactly participate in it because not every city has every position we have, but there are 50 to 100 cities across the state who use this system and input their data so that we can all compare and make sure we're on par. So.
Annette, is there a resolution number on
There
this
is. It's Resolution 02-2019.
I would move that we accept Resolution 02-2019, adopting the employee salary ranges and job titles as presented by Annette Spendlove.
It's been moved by Councilman Severing that we consider that we adopt the resolution 02-2019, employee salary ranges and job titles as presented by Annette Spendlove.
I'll second.
It's been seconded by Ryan, by Councilman Barker. Any other discussion or questions? If not, we'll begin the voting with Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Barker,
Yes.
Councilman Severing,
Yes.
Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Motion passes. Next item is discussion or action to consider an ordinance adopting the final budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. Our presenter will be Evan Nelson, our finance director.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we present to you the final proposed budget for fiscal year 2020. We have worked a lot together with you and with staff over the course of the past months. We presented a tentative budget to you that was approved on May 14th. Then we held a public hearing on May 28th where residents were able to provide comment on the proposed budget. And tonight we seek your approval for this final budget. Since we last met and talked about the budget, we have made a few changes, and so I wanted to go over those and make sure everyone understands those and we can answer questions as well. So first of all, we received our liability, property, and vehicle insurance renewal. In the tentative budget, we had estimated what we thought that would be, and now we have an actual number, and our estimate was $7,000 shy. So we're proposing to add $7,000 back in, or add that into the budget to be able to pay for that. A lot of that comes out of the general fund, but the utility funds also help pay for the insurance costs. Since the last discussion, we received our final revenue numbers from Weber County. The council has directed us to include the property tax revenue based on the certified property tax rate, which means we're not proposing an increase to property taxes. And so that rate came in at 0.001082, which is expected to generate $1,218,856 in property tax revenue. So the good news is that number is actually higher than what we had estimated by about $9,000. So that extra revenue helps to cover the underestimate on insurance. And so we've made adjustments in the final budget to account for those changes. The details of those adjustments were included in the staff report modifying the insurance expense in the budget has a ripple effect, so it affected quite a few different budget line items, but you can see a lot of the dollar amounts are insignificant. The third thing that we have added to the budget is actually in the redevelopment agency budget, and that is an expenditure of $60,000 on a retaining wall and landscaping project behind Lee's Marketplace. So that was a project that had been previously discussed and had not been included in the budget, and so we wanted to add that in and give the council a chance to either discuss it or let us know what direction you would like to go on that. The rest of the budget that has been presented is as it has. It's still the same as it was before, and the utility rates that we're proposing are the same as we've discussed in the past. So
that $60,000, council, is RDA funds. We didn't get anybody to bid on it, partly because it's the height of the building season and excavators are very busy. We're hoping that in the fall they'll be able to, but essentially that money goes unspent this year out of the RDA budget and would be added for an expenditure next year. And next fiscal year, I guess, is after July 1.
Do you have any questions on the budget?
Questions from the council?
So, Evan, we came out balanced, right?
We did.
Excellent. And again, that $60,000 for the RDA will not take effect until next year.
Correct.
Okay.
Next fiscal year.
Next fiscal year.
When you're approving tonight.
Right.
Councilwoman Stoker?
So, Evan, why was there $7,000 more increased in the insurance? They just upped the rates, or why was that?
Annette, do you want to respond to that?
We always estimate what our liability insurance premium will be, and we've added some new structures and some new vehicles, and it raised our rate.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions, council, for Evan? Thanks for all your good work in putting this together, and thanks, council, for all the good work and help that you have given in putting this budget together. It's taken a long time and a lot of work, and appreciate all those involved, as well as staff members in our city. It's been a combined effort and done very well. It's a balanced budget, and there's no new taxes. Famous last words of Ronald Reagan, I guess. If there's no other questions, I entertain a motion to approve the budget for 2019 and 20.
Is there an ordinance number?
There is. It's 2019-10.
And council, you do need to include the certified property tax rate, which, Evan, do you want to give that to the council again? I wrote it down, but I'm not sure I can read.
It's in the ordinance. They just need to state.
Okay.
Okay, we will try this. I propose that we accept the ordinance 2019-10 in adopting the budget and property tax rate for North Ogden City for the fiscal year July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020.
A motion has been made by Councilwoman Stoker to approve our fiscal budget for 2019 and 20, ordinance number 2019-10.
You need to state the tax rate.
Tax rate.
Do we need to actually state that? It was in the ordinance, isn't it?
Okay.
It's in the ordinance already.
I'll second.
A second by Councilman Barker. Any other questions or discussion? Begin the voting by Councilman Barker,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Motion approved. Thank you. Next item, I would entertain a motion to recess the regular meeting and convene in a redevelopment agency meeting.
Mayor, I'll move that we recess the regular meeting and convene in the RDA meeting.
It's been moved by Councilman Swanson to recess the regular meeting and convene the redevelopment agency meeting.
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilwoman Stoker. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Moving on in the RDA agenda, our discussion and action to consider an agreement giving North Ogden City and neighboring property owners cross-access easement at approximately 300 East. Our presenter will be John Call, our city administrator attorney.
So, board members, not council, board members of the RDA board, this agreement is essentially between the 5 property owners of the property you see on this screen here. I'll walk down to the area here, but there is the Barkers, who essentially own the majority of this piece. Dennis Farr is kind of the family representative for that. There's a piece here owned by SECO 70. Ryan Forsyth's company owns that. He's sitting here. The Howell family owns this piece, about basically this property split in half. America First Credit Union owns this piece. They closed on it a couple weeks ago. And then the city owns the detention basin. The purpose of this agreement is there'll be a road installed here, and it would provide access for all the property owners to have drive aisles to get to that road. As Councilman Barker said when he was a council member, not a board member, UDOT heavily restricts access along this road. Right now, this is the access for all these properties. It's planned that there'll be a street light put there eventually when the traffic studies warrant it. But the idea is that this will be the main entrance for all this property. And in order to do that, to participate, all the landowners are agreeing to participate in the road. And so they've come and asked us to also participate in the same amount as the rest of them at $150,000. It does guarantee us access to this property. Councilman Severin could probably maybe provide some input. I'm catching him off guard, but the idea of that guaranteed access would add value to this property because it's not closed off from the rest of the development, at least in my opinion. But there again, this is that detention basin that the council's been talking about moving. If you weren't going to move the basin, then this is not as urgent. Other than it's better to have the easement now in case it was ever moved ever in the future, even if it's not moved to the other proposed location. We've been, as a staff, with Dave's help, trying to explore options of other places that water could get moved to again turn this piece into a commercially viable property. So, any questions about that or there are 2 changes to the agreement from what was provided in the packet. One is this corner of the property, it's its own separate parcel, is not included in the agreement. And then the other one is the agreement didn't include this property for the construction easement, and so it now includes the property for the construction easement. So those are the 2 tweaks to the ordinance or to the language in the agreement. But everything else is the same. All the dollar amounts in the parties and everything. Councilman Turner, you had a question?
So is this agreement transferable, meaning if we sold that piece of property, would the new owner have to participate in the road?
Yes, it runs with the land. The road is going to be constructed now, and so the RDA would essentially be loaning money. The redevelopment area would loan money to the community development area to pay for its portion now, And the theory would be that we would recoup that back on the sale if, by adding value to the property. So
when you say it's going to be built now, what do you mean? What time frame?
In the next 3 or 4 months.
Okay, if we sold that property next month, hypothetically, that would be transferable, or I just don't want to get stuck with it if we sold the property.
Right, and just so the council's aware, no one has given us an actual dollar offer yet, but I've had 3 different commercial developers approach me about the property. One has provided a letter of intent, but there's 2 others who have at least given a verbal interest in being included on the loop when the council's ready to put that on the market.
Okay.
If the council's ready to put it on the market, so. And the other thing that's also important, all of these properties are included in the community development area where the city, I'm trying to remember the exact percentage, but a significant portion of all the increased property taxes. So for example, when the O'Reilly's is built, the property goes from generating $1,000 a year in property tax to $20,000-$30,000 a year because of the improvements on it. That most of that tax increment goes into the community development area funds, which would then help pay for this road. So it's and the nice thing is with the redevelopment agency having the 2 balances it can use from the RDA and the CDA funds, there's about $1.2 million cash on hand in the RDA fund. Evan's going to double check that number, but it's cash that's in the bank and can just be shared, not shared, but essentially loaned to the CDA, and then when the CDA starts collecting its increment, which is this year, it'll start paying it back. With that in mind, just, the CDA is already $400,000 in debt to the RDA for the ACE building and the facade improvements on, I call it the Fizz building, but the Little Caesars to Fizz strip mall. So there is some money already owed between the 2. Yeah.
1.6 million is the estimate for the end of this fiscal year.
End of 2019. So the estimate is on June 30th, there'll be 1.6 million in the RDA that's unencumbered. It's just money in the bank. It has to be spent on redevelopment type projects, but it's not projected to be spent yet.
Other questions, council, or discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the agreement giving North Ogden City and neighboring property owners cross-access easement at approximately 300 East.
Well, I would move that we accept the agreement giving North Ogden. Is there an agreement number on this one? I couldn't remember.
A9-2019.
What was it again? I'm sorry.
A9.
A9-2019. 2019. I move that we accept agreement A9-2019, giving North Ogden City and neighboring property owners cross easement access at approximately 300 East in North Ogden, as presented by John Call.
It's been moved by Councilman Severin that we approve the agreement A9-2019, giving North Ogden City and neighboring property owners cross-access easements at approximately 300 East.
Second.
So I just had a quick question. Are you okay with the 2 changes I identified? The one was the northeast corner of the Barker property is not included in the cross-access, which shouldn't be an issue, and the construction easement will also be included on the O'Reilly's development. Those are the 2 things that the language hasn't been added, but it will be before it's signed. Are you okay with that, Councilman Severin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a question. Just curious, why wasn't that included?
The northeast corner,
Mm-hmm.
at a request of the Barker family. It's its own current separate parcel, so it's that kind of green corner in the northeast is its own separate parcel. Ryan might be able to answer that question if you want to allow him to do that. He was on the phone call with the different entities today about that.
You may approach.
Yeah, it was left off because that.
State your name and.
Ryan Forsyth, 300 East and 2600 North. It was left off because that specific parcel doesn't have an access point or a future access point. So there was no reason to identify that access point. So that was the main reason.
So UDOT's not going to even let a driveway go across in that green area in the northeast corner. So they don't, our cars and other cars would never cross it. It's kind of a cul-de-sac for lack of a better analysis.
There won't be any mutual, it will have access but it'll be provided access from the Barker's other property. It won't need to have its own access point to Washington or 2600. All the other parcels have their own separate access points. And the reason why that's important is because the city and UDOT entered into a access agreement, I guess, a corridor agreement, and that's what's kind of caused the whole issue. Is they've spelled out where these access points are going to be, and had that access not been identified by UDOT, that road wouldn't have to be put in. We could just have private access into each one, but it would leave a lot of that property having no access. Specifically, the city parcel would have just really bad access. So, yeah, that's the reason why that road's going right there, is because it's a corridor agreement between the city and UDOT.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, John, that parcel's going to be altered anyway when they do the widening some anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, UDOT is, my understanding, reaching out to them for the widening of their half of the western portion of 26/2700.
There don't need to be any adjustments to the motion.
No, if that answers your questions, then there wouldn't need to be any more adjustments.
Okay.
Can I just say, even though it's a great family name, we're not related.
Okay.
If anyone's wondering, I'd have to do family history to see how we're related to them. But
Okay, we've had a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Councilman Swanson. Any other discussion or questions? Begin the voting then with Councilman Severing.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilman Barker.
yes.
Motion passes. Next item is a discussion and action to consider an ordinance adopting the RDA final budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. Presenter will be Evan Nelson, our finance director.
Before Evan speaks, council, next meeting, when we amend the final budget for the current year we're operating in, we'll bring back that expenditure line for the $150,000 contribution to this So.
Yes, Evan.
Thank you. We've gone over the RDA and CDA budgets multiple times, and so we're coming back to you for final budget approval. We did have our public hearing along with the city budget at the last meeting. And then, as I mentioned before, we've added that $60,000 expenditure into this budget that we're asking you to approve, as well as the other items that have been presented and discussed in the past. So we propose approval of the final budget for the redevelopment agency, and there's been a resolution provided in the packet for that, or an ordinance, I'm sorry.
What's the ordinance number?
RDA 2019-10.
I move that we approve RDA-2019-10, the RDA final budget for fiscal year 2019-2020, as presented.
It's been moved by Councilman Barker that we approve RDA 2019-10 final budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Councilman Severing. Any other questions or discussion? We'll begin the voting then with Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Barker,
Yes.
Councilman Severing.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next item, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the RDA portion of the RDA meeting and reconvene in regular city council meeting.
I'll make the motion that we adjourn RDA meeting and reconvene in the regular city council meeting.
It's been moved that we reconvene or adjourn in the RDA meeting, reconvene in regular city council meeting.
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilwoman Stoker. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next item is discussion or action to consider a noise ordinance amendment for city-sponsored events at the Amphitheater. Presented by John Call, City Administrator Attorney.
So, Council, Tiffany with the Parks Department is also here. This issue came up as we were preparing to do our movies in the park this last Friday. We put up our makeshift screen and then tried to run a couple of projectors on it to see if it was visible, how it would work, and found that it didn't work for the 8 o'clock start time, essentially. It was too bright outside. We looked at the option of closing the building, shutting the door, and letting people sit on the stage, but there's not a fire system in the building, so we couldn't do that. And so the idea was proposed that if we started at 9, we could see this movie screen and have these events at the amphitheater, but that would violate the noise ordinance. And so as we looked at the ordinance, this was identified as would the council be willing to make an exception for these events, put it in the code and allow it to happen in perpetuity, or as an option to try it this year and see how it goes. There aren't a lot of events planned this year because of the construction activities, and the council has only essentially authorized the use of the apron for events until it's finished. And so that was the idea. As was mentioned by several of the public, there is competing interests. This is why you guys get to make the hard policy decisions, which is, it will undoubtedly impose some impact on the neighbors. We have done it in the past. Apparently, either our ordinance was changed from when we did it last, or we were violating our ordinance in the past, to be quite honest. But I believe we've had 6 or 5 years of movies in the park. Tiffany, 10 years, where we've rotated them through the different parks in the city. This was the first year we were bringing it back to Barker Park for a few years. But it, sorry. It's a policy question. The council can do what they like. The hard thing about this is if we don't adjust the time, we won't really be able to do movies in the park. In theory, in the future, we could do it inside the building with the doors closed, but then it wouldn't really be movies in the park. It'd be movies in the building. But those are the type of things the council can talk about. Tiffany, do you have comments? Or Tiffany's always more eloquent on these things than I am, so.
Just a little bit more information. North Ogden City has had movies. I have record of them since 2008 in the parks and also at the Aquatic Center. And then when we were looking at this to see what other cities were doing, we looked around, and there are 33 cities that we looked at throughout Utah who start their movies either at dusk, 9 p.m., 9:15 p.m., or 9:30 p.m., many of which have other activities before. They start earlier with games, events, and activities. There is one location, Layton City, that starts earlier at 7:30 p.m., and they have an LED screen, so like a large TV that they play their movies on, and Ogden City also starts at 7:30 p.m. But for the vast majority of the cities that we looked at, they start at dusk or 9 o'clock or later.
So Tiffany, how well attended are the movies in the park? I mean, years ago I went to them a few times at Barker Park, but I haven't gone to any others. So.
Because of concerns that we had, we used to have the movies consistently. We had 6 or 7 that would be right in a row every single week on Fridays. And because of concerns with teenagers hanging out at the park, not watching the show, but just being there and congregating, we've tried a few different things. We've tried rotating parks. We've tried alternating the evenings. And our last movies in the park, we had about 20 to 30 people come. Part of this was advertising, and part of it was just the lack of consistency. Not having a movie every single Friday night makes it a little more difficult for people to plan on. They have to be intentionally going to the movies.
What about the ones that are the aquatic? I mean, is that the same?
We have a couple hundred.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Tiffany, what other parks has it been done in?
We've tried Mountain View and Wadman Parks.
And how did those work?
Well, we have between 50 and 100 people.
Just out of curiosity, how would like Oakland work? Oakland's got plenty of parking. It's got the concessions.
We could do it there as well. We found that as we rotate parks, we're less likely to have people be there just because it changes. People do well with consistency.
Oakland seems to be a little bit more isolated than some of the other parks, depending on where you put the
it does have a lot of
screen.
trees.
And Council, we would still need to amend the ordinance to allow for activities to occur after 10 p.m. In the other parks, because like I said, in the past, we've apparently been violating the 10 o'clock curfew. Yep.
So this ordinance is just for the amphitheater, though, correct?
Yes. And one of the options we talked about was the sunset, putting in an automatic that this would be the ordinance for the next 4 months, and if the council didn't adopt it, then it would sunset, and next year we'd be starting from scratch again, just to see how it works this year. I had at least 2 people, which isn't a lot of people, and that reached out to me to find out why it had been canceled, or if it had been canceled. So that's the only time I've had 2 people reach out to me about parks activities. Not that that's an indicator one way or another of how well attended it would have been.
So is our pilot this year just 3 movies?
We have 4
4
that
movies,
we can
okay.
show. Yep, the one that we didn't show, we can show at a later date.
Tiffany, was there a reason why you decided to do them in the park rather than the float? What did you call it?
At the pool?
Float and flick.
We have
or what it
both.
was? So you would do them both places?
Mm-hmm.
Tiffany, when they were held at the other parks, did you have any concerns that were raised?
No, I did not. The only trouble I have with other facilities is making sure I have enough electricity.
So, like at Mountain View Park, is there enough electricity there?
Mm-hmm. I just have to pull it from the restrooms.
Same with Oakland, isn't it?
Yeah, so placement is only an issue because of electricity.
Can I, this is my opinion on my short time on the council. We've had people come in asking for variances, and we've said we don't give variances. Whether that's Jim Shoup with his driveway or the call your parents down on 2100, we always change our standards so it accommodates everyone. So if we want to change this to make it so we can have a movie in the park, I think we need to change our whole noise ordinance to allow everyone to go till 11 o'clock at night or whatever it is. My view is government, we should be setting the standard and holding ourselves to it, not holding citizens and then we do what we want. So if we're going to change it, I say we change it for everyone. That's my opinion.
I have a hard time going against our own rules.
Right.
So it doesn't.
But if we want to change it, let's change it.
So John,
we'll discuss it.
John, what is it for Sure it is, because that's after 10.
So in the ordinance, it's 11 o'clock for the event as well as across the city. So it actually, in the noise ordinance, says the noise ordinance is extended till 11 o'clock on July 4th.
And this, again, this is just for amphitheater?
No, it's both. So it's actually citywide. In theory, we can all play our music till 11 o'clock on July 4th. I think there's a state law that says you can shoot fireworks till midnight.
Till midnight on the 4th.
So, in theory, the state ordinance for fireworks trumps our sound ordinance for fireworks, but the music and other things, it allows till 11 on the 4th of July.
So for a clarification for me, it says on the discussion, consider noise and ordinance amendment for city-sponsored events at the amphitheater, but this one, this ordinance doesn't just say just the amphitheater.
This one does.
It does in the amended version.
This one does.
In the amended version it does. That's what
okay.
Yeah. So there's two different noise ordinances that are in the same health and safety section of the code. One relates just to the amphitheater, and one relates to all other parks and noise in the city. And in the one that relates citywide, it specifically says, here's the section for specific rules about the amphitheater. Essentially mirror each other, with a few minor exceptions where it's actually a little more stringent on the amphitheater as far as starting events earlier in the morning and things like that. So in some ways, the amphitheater, for example, there's no music allowed before 10 a.m., whereas other parks, there's not that prohibition that I remember. But I also haven't read the ordinance looking for that question recently, so.
I don't think we want to make a general change to 11 o'clock across the city. But I agree totally with Councilman Barker that we need to, as a city, we need to lead out in being in ordinances of 10.
John, is it possible, is there a way that this can be done where use of one of the other parks is done if we have agreement from the neighbors that surround the park?
I think the issue with that would be defining neighbors. Because some are fence line neighbors, some are across the street, some are within hearing distance. I know that a good example is last year I had someone call and complain about noise at one of our parks, and it turned out it was the fish farm. It wasn't one of our parks that was actually causing the noise. It was every Friday night they were holding barbecues commonly, and some people thought it was events at our parks as opposed to the fish farm. So I think there might be some issues defining neighbors as well as if you have one holdout, then that would ruin the whole opportunity. So it's usually easier to do something like what Councilman Barker said, which is it's either allowed for everyone.
Well, and I called Roy City because I had family members that go to their movies in the park, and their noise ordinance is 11 down there. So that, because they said they don't want to violate their own.
And if you wanted to, you could make it later on the weekends. That some cities do that, where they say even the parks are open later on weekends than weekdays. But that's, those are some of their options.
I know that our approach is more about just about the city ordinance for the sound, but man, I'd sure like to see that move to a park that's a little bit more isolated, myself anyway. I know that's probably for a separate day, but. And if we could just get some consistency at another park that, like I say, Oaklawn Park seems to be one of the better, more isolated parks in the city. But I'm not in favor of moving it to 11 o'clock. I don't know if that's the best idea.
With that in mind, would you like us to give you some aerial views of the parks to help you decide which parks are more isolated? We could say, here's the property lines, here's all the neighbors who touch the park property line or are across the street, and and use that as information to kind of decide.
I think that would be helpful.
Tiffany, when is our next Movies in the Parks scheduled for? So in theory, we would have a council meeting on the 25th of June, but it would only be 3 days before the next Movies in the Park night. And it'd be hard to, in those 3 days, let people know where it's at.
Do we know the cost of a
You could just put out
LED
those
screen?
billboards.
I don't think we know the cost of an LED screen, but my guess is it would be tens of thousands of dollars. We have looked at the cost of some, for example, there's a company in Australia who does a projector screen that holds light better, but they're, for the size we'd need, they're very, very expensive. And so we've been trying to look at equipment options as well to start them earlier.
I'm willing to go to Australia and pick one up if you'd like. So, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I was just, so I'm just thinking of Barker Park and then Lyman to the east. He's letting us light off the fireworks, and then we clean up his field and stuff. But eventually, that's going to sell. We used to not have fireworks down in that area. What happens when that changes again? I mean, we're going to have to redo the whole ordinance because it very well could change. We aren't going to do them there. We used to do them at Weber High, which we used to do them at North Ogden Park when I was growing up. So, I mean, I'm just not sure how the 4th of July thing works in here. Plus, I kind of feel like changing the time, if we're telling everybody else 10 o'clock, believe it or not, Aaron, I agree with you. I live just a block away from there, and I can hear stuff sometimes at the park, and I'm deaf, and and it doesn't bother me very much because I'm not far enough away. But it's just the whole. If we're going to have a rule, we ought to obey it too. That's kind of my thought. But I tell you right now, my kids love to go into the movies at the park, but I don't think they watched them. They were screwing around. But that's what my kids do. So we're not giving you any help, are we, John?
Well, I think at some point it'd be helpful for the council to say, you want us to bring back more options, or you want to do away with Movies in the Park, unless we can find equipment that'll support the earlier start time.
I'd prefer to do away with Movies in the Park unless we get equipment that support otherwise. Or we start them earlier and just have people tough it out, We can still do the floats and thing, but, that would be my take on this right now then.
Well, I think I would like to have some options presented.
I agree with Blake. I'd like to see some options.
If we could move on that quickly, we could be prepared for June 28th. The only reason I suggested Oaklawn Park is, again, it's a little bit more isolated. There's plenty of parking, there's concessions, there's bathroom.
It's not going to be isolated for long. It's not going to be isolated for long.
Now then we just evaluate it then. It seems like Barker Park. I mean, I do have a lot of empathy for the neighbors of the people at Barker near the amphitheater on Barker Parkway, because there is a lot that does go on there and will go on there, and wonder about the necessity and propriety of moving it somewhere else so that they're not constantly hammered with a ton of traffic. And
it seems in the consensus, if I read it correctly, we want to talk about more options.
Yep.
It's my preference.
Okay. Then
So council, just so we're clear with that, if you want more options related to where it can be held, I think it still will require a ordinance change to 11 p.m. because in the other parks, the problem's actually bigger because we don't have a building that shades it as well as at the amphitheater. So we'll still need to probably look at a time change to 11 o'clock, because we'll still need to start the movies at 9 o'clock, give or take.
Well, I think I'm thinking, I just agree with the idea that they just tough it out. We're done by 10. That's the ordinance. And if we find out that it's not successful because the film is not all that visible, then maybe we just change the offering of movies in the park.
Can I ask Tiffany a question? Mm-hmm. Tiffany, how do you do the movies at the pool? What time do you start and the ending, and how does that work versus this?
So in the past, the movies at the pool have started at 9:15 p.m. We found that much earlier, and you can't see the screen.
When do they get over?
It depends on the length of the show, and that varies from an hour and 20 minutes to 2 hours and 20 minutes.
So does that mean that the pool's been in violation of the noise ordinance?
Yes.
They only really have one neighbor.
They only have one neighbor?
Yeah.
Firemen don't care.
Well, I think it is just indicative of the fact that we've got to make sure that as a city we have to be the lead. If we're going to expect an ordinance, we would expect any business entity or any private residence to follow the same code. So
okay, then, council, do we need to regroup on this particular item? Is that what we're saying at this point in time?
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying, Mayor, is that we don't want to move on the item number 11 on the agenda tonight, and we'd like to regroup and look at other options before we make a final decision. That's my feeling.
I agree. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, the biggest thing is going against our own noise ordinance. So either has to stay the same or change across the board, across the city. So I agree, we need more information.
Okay, then we'll table this one for further studying. Okay, item 12, discussion or action to consider an agreement on street work. Presenter will be John Call.
So, council, we did, as you know, we share an engineer, which is actually the next item, with Pleasant View. He's technically our employee. We rent him out to Pleasant View. But with that, the idea was brought up that if we combine our street maintenance work between the two cities, we'd get larger contractors to bid and a better price. Dave's still here as well, so he can add some to that. We have bid it out as both cities. The engineer suggested that we have an agreement that identifies the split of responsibilities between the two. This is a copy of that agreement. It was originally proposed that we would pay the invoices and then we would invoice Pleasant View for it, and we as a staff said no, we're not going to do that. So now it's written up where when we get an invoice, Pleasant View will approve their portion, we'll approve our portion, and then both cities would independently cut checks and we'd send them to the contractor together. That's essentially the terms of the agreement. The other thing it does do is it provides some indemnification between the two, that if there's something wrong on our side of the municipal boundary, we'll take care of it and make the contractor whole or the injured party, and they would do the same thing if it was on their side. But it's a fairly simple agreement, though. With the success of the bidding this year, we're hoping to actually make this an ongoing type of a thing, and there might even be a potential to include Harrisville at some point, or just because Dave can probably tell you some better numbers, but I want to say we came in 20% lower than for our portion than we expected on some of the quantities, chips and asphalt costs. So Dave, can you come provide some more insight on. Dave does this way more than I do, so.
Yeah, so John is exactly right. We saved about 20% from what our engineers were estimating our cost to be compared to what the cost actually came in from Staker Parsons. And so the whole idea came up actually because the Public Works Director for Pleasant View actually came and said, hey, we're doing Pleasant View Drive from the roundabout all the way to the North Ogden City border. And we had already been talking about doing that ourselves. So we said, hey, you know, that contractor can just keep going and do the whole road. It'll make it look a lot better by having one contractor instead of two different ones trying to work in the same area. So that's kind of where it came from. But yeah, the cost came in very good. In fact, chip, asphalt, and the slurry all came in lower than any of the prices last year. So, I mean, we saved quite a bit of money compared to previous years just by doing a huge quantity like this.
So to put you on the spot, what's the dollar figure that we saved?
So we saved about, well, it would be about 200,000, about that. So, because the project came in at, I'm trying to think of what the two combined came in at, but it was like, because it was about $1 million where the project came in, and the engineers were, you know, 120 or 1.2 million. So
a couple questions. Since we share the same engineer, I'm assuming that we got the same specs. Yes. Basically, I mean the asphalt's the same thickness, the road base, the T patch, all that, chip seal, all that quantities, oils, everything's the same.
Yep. So in fact, Pleasant View City actually has never done the leveling course and the chip that we've done the last 4 years. They really liked how it's turned out for North Ogden City. Every road that we've done it on has turned out really good. And so this was their first year actually putting that into their standards and actually using it. And so, so we do have the same standards as far as that goes.
Well, does it include curb gutter? If you're doing that, does it include striping and all that stuff too with that, or?
Yeah, so no curb and gutter. We didn't have any curb and gutter in there, but we did have, like I said.
Even in the future, you might, right?
Yeah, we could, and I think we could put it into this agreement as well. But this one just does all the stuff that's in this agreement as far as the chip, the milling of the roads, the asphalt, striping, like you said. So,
weren't some of the millings? Were we keeping some of the millings?
We have. So we take it up to the pit. We hold it there. Our water department and some of our other departments use it for roads that go up to some of our spring facilities. By mixing that with road base and putting it on the road, in the winter times, a lot of times that will melt a little faster, so the guys are able to get up to some of these spring boxers.
So the milling we're getting in Pleasant View, are we going to use that, or do they get that, or is that going to be a share?
They'll get to keep theirs if they'd like, and we keep ours. I haven't really worked. Our pre-count's tomorrow, so as far as that detail, I can find out, but I don't know if they wanted it or not.
All right, thanks.
Other questions for Dave? Thank you, Dave.
Is this agreement A10 2019?
A10 2019.
Mayor, I'd move that we approve agreement A10-2019, agreeing to work together with Pleasant View on street work as presented.
Okay, I had a motion by Councilman Swanson to consider agreement on street work with Pleasant View, agreement number A10 2019.
I second that.
The second by Councilman Severine. Begin the vote of Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilman Barker.
Yes.
Councilman Severine.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Motion passes. Next item is discussion or action to consider an agreement for city engineer. Our presenter will be John Call.
So council, this is a an agreement that we've had for the past 2 years with Pleasant View for our city engineer. His name's Lauren Barker. He's been, in our opinion, and I believe Pleasant View's as well, a valuable asset to the community. It's one of the things that's really nice about him is he's in our offices. He's here all the time. What we found is with the speed of development and projects, we're actually using about 60% of the time, and Pleasant View is using about 40%. We get an itemized hourly accounting from him every year that we share with Pleasant View, or every month that we share with Pleasant View to just see what projects are being worked on. And one of the reasons we have him track hours is to make sure that we're getting enough, or getting money from the development community who are paying for plan check fees and stuff, or subdivision check fees, that they're covering his time to do those. He also does a lot of other things. For example, he's the project lead on the debris basin up on 3100 at the mouth of the divide. And he'll be the project manager of the widening for 2600 North. But he has years of experience, and essentially we use him more than Pleasant View does. And so in just trying to be fair to them, we're recommending a 60-40 split instead of the 50-50 that we've been operating under for the past 2 years. Pleasant View's already accepted this agreement and seems to be okay with it, obviously because it's cheaper for them, right? But we also did already plan for this in the budget, so it won't change the budget at all, and we'll still have the full use of that position. And my impression is that even the development reviews aside, which used to just be a pass through to the developers, as the city on our projects and the things that we've done, we've saved what we're spending on the salary plus then some for Lauren's time here. Our consulting engineers don't bill us as many hours as they used to. They still do bill us hours, and we still pay them, and they're happy for the work. But in general, we've seen a reduction across all the utility accounts as well as the general fund for projects and things that Lauren's able to help us with.
Questions or discussion from the council? I would then entertain a motion to approve this agreement.
Is it A11, 2019? Yes. Okay. I move that we approve agreement A11, 2019, the agreement for city engineer.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilman Barker that we approve agreement number A11-2019 with the agreement for a city engineer coupled with Pleasant View on a 60-40 basis. Been seconded by Councilwoman Stoker. Begin the voting. Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilman Barker?
Yes.
Councilman Severine?
Yes.
Councilman Turner?
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Motion passes. Next item is discussion or action to consider the names for our general planning committee. You have in front of you a list of individuals who have served on this committee before. There may be others that are new as well. I've contacted all of these individuals, and they're willing to continue to serve on the General Plan Committee. So I'm presenting these names to you this evening. Of course, myself on here, Phil Swanson, Ryan Barker, Annette Spenlove, Bruce Christensen, Charlotte Bailey, Christian George, Dan Nixon, Don Waite, Eric Thomas, Grant Protzman, Mark Brown, Rob Scott, Robert Buller, Susanna Burt, and David Gordon. I submit those names for your approval.
Council, just as a clarification, Annette will not be a voting member. She's there to, her or one of the recorders will be there to take minutes. And these will be public meetings with, public input and things.
There's not a number right on this, just an approval.
Correct.
So I move that we accept the names for the general plan committee as mentioned by Mayor Chug.
It's been moved by Councilman Severin to accept the members of the general plan committee.
Second.
And second by Councilwoman Stoker. Begin the voting with Councilman Barker.
Yes.
Councilman Severin.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Motion approved.
And council, just by way of information, this committee will be doing one thing that's been state mandated this year, which is amending the moderate income housing plan in our general plan. That's the main reason for it. But also we will be looking at options of other topics to discuss. I know the council's talking about transferable development rights. The idea being making some properties in the city a little more dense, if that means there can be other areas of the city that would remain open space. Those can be complicated ordinances, but I think that's one of the things, if the council would like, that this committee could wade into and try to figure out what recommendations on properties, and even if that type of a program would work for the city, as well as other recommendations on anything else the committee felt might need to be addressed, or that the council felt needed to be addressed.
Primarily an update, then to include those items that John just mentioned. Okay, item 15 is a discussion item only on the number of dogs homeowners can have. This is presenter will be Phil Swanson, our council member.
Council, this is really just an interest gathering, whether or not we want to move forward and have the discussion. I've been approached by a number of pet owners across the city who are interested in changing the number of dogs that would be allowed under ordinance to 3. There are quite a few folks, quite a number actually, that already have that and more dogs. So the question in my mind has become, do we get tougher about enforcing the ordinance that we currently have at 2 dogs now that with our part-time code enforcement officer? Do we, as other cities have done, change the number to 3? My purpose tonight is just to gather from you whether or not we want to move forward and have this discussion. If you do, then I'll do more of the research and find out from neighboring cities what their ordinances are and what the results have been and those kinds of things.
Can I ask a question of the chief? How often do we go on barking dog complaints and loose dogs? And besides, it's a lot.
10 times a day.
So if we go from 2 to 3, we're getting almost.
Well, if you're talking math, I would tell you it increased by 33%, but I doubt that would be the case. You know, like I think there was a citizen that commented on 2 or 3 dogs, 1 dog, 5 dogs. It's usually the owner. That's the problem. So,
Chief, so 6 to 10 times a day, you guys actually respond to dog kinds of?
Yeah, to animal issues.
Really? Wow.
And the majority of those are dogs. And it could be anywhere from a bite to a bark to a roaming, and anything, a dog stuck under a bed, we do it all.
So do you have any feelings about this? Just out of curiosity?
No, I really don't have any objections to it, and I don't. Obviously, it's our dog owners that pay for our services, and so the more dogs we have in the city, the more services we can provide to take care of them. So.
And that was my next question. What's our dog license fee? I see it on our budget.
It's anywhere from $5 to $30, depending on if the dog's spayed, neutered, chipped,
and if you're on time.
Yeah, there's late fees if you're late. So,
anticipate any problems with pygmy goats?
That's the next one. You're jumping ahead.
I'm sorry.
We've had a few with
one time. That was bad. I'm sorry.
I can't say goats are a big problem for us, so. We did have one the other day, that was a handful, but he wasn't a pygmy.
Mountain goat?
No. We could have painted him white, and he might have passed this one, though.
Thank you, Chief.
Mayor. So, Council, Annette pointed out, our ordinance actually says right now it's animals, like we limit to 2 animals, one dog, 1 cat, 3 dogs, or, 2 dogs. So it would essentially be increasing the number of animals per residence, unless we tweak the language to specifically say it's dogs only or cats only, or if the next item, if there's a desire to add goats, then maybe that's included in the same number too, just as a heads up.
Council, your thoughts then on moving forward and having the discussion?
Why not?
So you know how I feel. I'm for having the discussion.
I think it's, Phil, I've had 2 people over the last year approach me about it. So I think it's worth the discussion. It's on the minds of some of the citizens, so.
I spoke with our animal enforcement officer, and she would support the change. She sees many instances where there's, as John said, it would be a general change to the ordinance to 3 animals versus 3 dogs versus 3 cats versus 3 pygmy goats or potbelly pigs or whatever the future holds.
Do we have a potbelly pig?
No.
No.
I didn't think so.
No.
Potbelly man.
No pigs.
Potbelly
you're in
owners, but
4-H.
no pigs.
So
You're in
John,
4-H.
just a point of clarification for me. You said this is number of dogs, you say number of critters. So if I have 1 dog, 2 cats, am I out of ordinance?
Under the strict reading, yes.
That's what I understood.
But does anyone really have a cat?
The exception would be if you were on an agricultural piece.
Yeah.
You're allowed livestock animals that don't count towards the total number of animals.
So, and what's considered a pet in the sense that, a parrot?
We don't count birds, rabbits, or anything inside that.
Squirrels.
Gerbils, hamsters, snakes, those kinds of things. There's not a limit currently, and chickens. There is an ordinance that relates to.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, what happens if chickens are just, you have to maintain the chickens you have in your backyard, right? If they begin to go out, violating of ordinance?
The animal enforcement officer has gone in and encouraged people to keep their animals on their property. Some people do let the chickens run loose in the front yard, and she's encouraged them to keep them in the backyard in a fenced area.
Okay.
So, yes.
I hate chickens.
Well, then I'll move forward and gather more information and have this on a future council agenda.
I'm indifferent to it.
Yeah. I know. Gerald, you okay with that? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Swanson.
Now, just so, again, Phil, this does not have to do with people who are, because it seems like there are some people that can already have more than 2 dogs if they are like
Right.
service animals or if they're used for work or something. Isn't that what I understand?
Yeah,
that
there's some
correctly?
exceptions. I don't know them off the top of my head.
Okay, but
There is some ordinances.
But
in
this,
place.
this
is
would
separate
be just
of that.
general pet
Correct,
ownership,
right.
yeah. Changing the number of pets allowed to 3, and if, as we move to the next item, perhaps adding what is approved as acceptable as a pet.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to item 16, discussion on pygmy goats.
Yeah.
Councilman Swanson.
Council, this item has also come up after being approached by a number of residents. And we have some folks here in the city that already have pygmy goats in their yards. And they're fairly quiet when you have 2 of them. Midvale City was the first, is the first city to allow this just back in March 6th. Midvale unanimously approved pygmy goats to be added to the list of acceptable yard pets. Their ordinance is not interesting. It's quite restrictive. They limit the size of the goat from a height standpoint so that you can't sneak in what kind of goat do you have, John?
Nigerian dwarf.
A Nigerian dwarf that's bigger than a pygmy.
I was going to say, I thought they called them miniature goats because they had pygmies and they had like a big
Yeah,
range.
John would have a miniature. The pygmies are even smaller. Typically, they're about 14 to 18 inches at the shoulder. They weigh anywhere, up to about 45 pounds, so smaller than my dogs.
And just as a clarification, I have an agricultural piece of property.
Yes, you do.
So,
John, you're not the person I was talking about. Midvale's ordinance also stipulates that you can own 2 goats, not 1, and you can't own 2 or more, because a single goat apparently is lonely and will be quite noisy. And Julie, you probably can verify to that, where if you have 2 goats, they get along with each other and they're happy because they have a friend, and who doesn't like a friend, and they are quiet. And they're relatively low on the smell meter. Would you call it that, Julie? Because they're vegetarians, and it would fertilize the grass if you have them going around. They're great weed eaters. They love the weeds in people's yards. They are somewhat of escape artists, especially if they're lonely and they're alone and they don't have anything to do. So perhaps looking at the Midvale ordinance as a template to start from and look at what they've done. I'm happy to call them, and they spent about 10 months working on their ordinance down there before they finally approved it. So again, a discussion on whether or not you would like to have this discussion going forward. I'll do the research and bring it back.
If it's on a citizen's mind, we need to address it.
I think they're cute as can be. My dogs wouldn't enjoy them, but I think they're awfully cute.
I'd enjoy them.
To eat.
So I thought goats were not very nice smelling. Are pygmy different?
my understanding, and understand that both mine are neutered males, but the unneutered males can be very robust smelling.
Okay.
That's part of the Midvale ordinance, is that in order, they have to be licensed just like a dog. They also have to be fixed. You can't have an intact male or female. They have to be fixed appropriately. And there were a number of other items that they went through to create the restrictions that they felt would allow them to operate in people's yards. There's restrictions on the enclosure that they're in. There has to be an enclosure. You can't just have them on a chain in your backyard. There has to be fencing, certain height, those kinds of things to ensure that they don't escape as best you can. Okay with me researching that more then? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Swanson, on those two items. That concludes our agenda. We'll have public comments.
Okay, I'll go first. Meg Sanders, 2915 North, 875 East. My husband's watching at home, so hello, dear. I got your texts. I'm going to go by order of the agenda on what I kind of took issue with. First, movies in the park. I want to commend Councilman Barker. You've just been talking a lot of sense tonight. I like the idea of let's follow our own rules. So talk a lot of sense in saying that, does anyone really have a cat? That's very accurate as well. So I thought, nobody talked about Mountain View Park. That would be such a good place to have movies in the park. It has a really good hill. I'm sure the residents have a lot of empathy and would understand having a movie in Mountain View Park. So we should check that out. The second thing is the general committee. And I know we dissolved committees back in December. This one was not dissolved. You guys held that open. So the people that you just approved have been on this committee since 2015 when the last master plan was done.
Right.
So we don't want any new people on there. We want to keep the people that have been on there now for almost 5 years.
I'd be open to anybody that'd like to be on there.
I would love to be on it. Are you kidding me? I'd love it. There was never a chance to have it open and put in an application for it. So definitely put me down, which takes me to my next thing. There are only two women on that board, or on that committee, which are formidable women, but that's two. And there's a lot more than population-wise in North Ogden that are female, and I think the female perspective could be really helpful. So yeah, I definitely want to be on that committee. I know probably Julie and Stephanie. Yeah, look at you got your ladies. You got your ladies that want to do that. So I love that idea. Those are all of my things.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. You don't get 2 times. Just kidding.
Aaron Christensen, 2428 Parker Parkway. Thanks for your discussion tonight on the amphitheater. Carl, it didn't surprise me that you agreed with me. Thanks. So, in your discussion, as you're coming back to it, one of the things I hope you'll remember is that there's a big difference. I'm just looking at the sound amplification, the sound ordinance for everywhere else in the city. Under public parks, it says no person shall operate a sound amplification device within a public park which exceeds 75 dBc at a distance of 75 feet from the device, unless there's a special permit, and then it brings in the amphitheater. There's a big difference between if for some reason you opt to take it to 11 o'clock, which I hope you don't, because me personally, I don't realize how loud the area we live in, even in North Ogden, until I go to the valley, and it's dark and it's silent. And the peace that comes from that, as we're growing here, we're losing some of that. And so to take it to 11 o'clock, I hope you don't do that. But if you do, just please remember there's a big difference between 75 and the 90 that you put on Barker Park. Because if we're doing 90 dBc at the property line up to 11 o'clock at night, that's going to be, that could be devastating. That's loud and that's late. And so please take that into consideration as you're considering. Not all parks right now are created equal, and I'm not trying to push it onto other people's parks. I would tend to lean towards what Carl said, and that I think there's other ways to spend our money and other activities to do. Yeah, I mean, but I know some people like the movies in the park. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you for your comment. You think you'll get 2 also?
I do.
Great.
Thank you. Sean Casey, still living at 2444 Barker Parkway. My wife let me know that I was not clear last time I was up. So, with goats and animals, let's start with common reference. What does it matter how many animals we have if my neighbor has no idea I have them? Because the whole point is that we don't annoy our neighbors. So if John Call wants to have goats and cats and dogs, if no one knows it, awesome. Up our penalties. If we violate an ordinance, make it more liberal, but make the penalty stiffer, I think. Same is true with sound ordinances. If no one can hear what we do, who cares? Truly, make the amphitheater quiet. There's a big headphone trend since Apple did the iPod in 2002. So there's concerts with headphones. And they happen in public parks, and no one knows they're happening except for the traffic and the number of people. That's an idea. But 90 dBc, and by the way, you don't understand what I'm saying when I say 90 dBc, but I'll give it a relationship.
Some of us do, by the way.
All right? All right. So when you go to the Ogden Twilight series and Bonobo is playing, or the Flaming Lips, what you are experiencing at the park at that time under crescendo, maximum volume, is about 90 dBc. The reason for 90 dBc, because the weighting is specific, dBc is relative to content centered around music. The rest of the noise ordinance should have no dBc weighting. No other city has it that I can find. unless it pertains specifically to music and performance entertainment. The other consideration, so all the other things in the, as you discuss it, and by the way, I'm volunteering my time free of charge. And also leave the sarcasm at the door. The Alan Turner joke was kind of funny by accident. Anyway, so I'm not going to go there. But I will be professional if you choose to have me help you with the noise ordinance. But again, the noise ordinance should be specific to, well, it's annoying to me. I don't like Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat play. I don't want to hear it practiced. I don't want to hear it performed. I have a right in my property not to. So find a way to make it happen. If the other parks are also 90 dBc, okay, great. Make all parks 90 dBc. But it's a residential area. Barker Park is a residential area. It's not a performance arts venue. It never was a performance arts venue. It was snuck in from the beginning. All right. The other thing is, if you don't, so you're throwing Tiffany under the bus. She's never going to have a proper turnout at an event like Movies in the Park if you don't give her time to market and advertise. So you should decide on this quick so she can have a successful show. And that leads me to my last point, that government really should not be in the entertainment business. The only reason government gets in the entertainment business is for propaganda reasons. Government should provide opportunity and should ensure your rights as an individual with the minimum amount of cost to do it. Rights of property, ownership, pursuit of happiness. I shouldn't have to get my goat licensed by the city. I shouldn't have to ask the federal government if I want to marry my friend Harvey. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
John Call, 1895 North, 300 East. So I just got a message from my wife. She said that her and the kids were pretty disappointed that Movies in the Park got canceled last week, and they look forward to the opportunity to attend Movies in the Park in the future if you choose to pursue that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Kevin Burns, 795 East, 1925 North. I was question about the detention basin up on 3100 North. The large pile of dirt that has formed across the street. I don't recall what that was being used for in listening to the plans and stuff. Is there an explanation for that pile of dirt that they're hauling across the street and forming that with? Thank you.
Is that an answer, Council? So that's being stockpiled as road base for the development. I was kind of shocked at the size of it, but apparently that's fairly standard as they stockpile. They have to create a big turnaround so the semis as they go there can dump it. But it'll be essentially now moved around the property to be road base and reduce in size and you know.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, we'll move on to council, mayors, and staff comments. Start out with Councilman Turner.
Well, last night in our mosquito abatement meeting, John, there was the attorney, and mentioned there's a new House bill that was approved this last legislature. I wrote down I wrote down the number, but it's in another folder. House Bill 163. I don't know if that's about. It talks about city-owned. Yep. Were you going to talk about that, or I mean?
So that'll come next council meeting. Yes.
I mean, when I say affects our cities, not just districts, right? And so basically, so everybody knows that House Bill is, if you have a city cell phone and you make a personal phone call on your city cell phone, technically you could be charged with felony.
Yep.
If you're a city employee, or if you have driving a city vehicle and you stop at McDonald's at lunch while you're going to fix a water main break or something like that, you could be charged with a third-degree felony, if I understand that correctly.
Yep.
So we just need to look to see what we can do to protect us as a city and see really, it sounded to me like the bill was stupid. But I don't know if it is or not. Just when I'm hearing it from that attorney down there and the way he explained it, and it just seemed like it was a little ludicrous. But
the language in it is pretty harsh. It does give the cities a lot of flexibility that says you can establish whatever your policy is and what it means. So what personal use is acceptable, what isn't. You know, a good example is one of our officers who's required to drive their vehicle home because we make them take their vehicles with them. And if they stop and buy a gallon of milk, they could be violating it. All we have to do is put some provisions in our policy that says that doesn't count. That's an acceptable personal use. But we'll talk about that next meeting. My understanding is it was added to the state code because there were people who were clearly in violation of the intent of city policies, but there wasn't enough legs in any state criminal statute to catch them on it. And so it's just there as we can tell. It forces the cities to draw the line, and then also now the prosecutors know when employees have crossed the line. So
are you going to come, because what he did is he had written some language so we could define that with the mosquito board.
Yeah,
so you'll do something to be able to define that. I mean, for example, the one of the ladies that worked there, she was out collecting samples, mosquito larvae, and just last week and got a call, and her daughter had to go to the hospital. She was in a mosquito abatement truck. She called the boss. She drove to the hospital in the truck, and then she left the hospital so she could take the truck back, so she was in violation. So it seems like that we need to just make it parameters so that that makes sense.
And that's exactly what we'll do. We'll bring some recommended parameters, understanding that those might be tweaked during the meeting or even after, and it'll be included in our personnel policy. The police, for example, have a different policy manual that they follow. They have to follow ours and theirs, so they have two rules. But our current policy, for example, says electronic devices, minimal personal use is allowed. So if someone does take a personal call on a city phone, it's not a violation of our policy, so they wouldn't be in violation of the state ordinance either. But if somebody was, as the librarian Cache Valley found, if someone was spending $93,000 on, an app on their phone, then they would be held liable for it. So anyways, we'll be bringing that in more detail next meeting. So as exciting as it sounds, stay tuned.
Was I right on the House bill number, or was it on the HB number? Was I right on it?
Yep, 163.
Thanks. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Severin.
Just a quick follow-up. How were the bathrooms at Lowman View? And
sorry, what?
Just curious about the repairs in the bathrooms at Lowman View. And
that comes under the next budget.
Oh, is that next budget?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I thought they had started on it.
So in the budget you approved, there's $150,000 for that bathroom.
Okay. For some reason, in the back of my mind, I thought it was started. Maybe I missed this on one of our city council nights, but I happened to talk to Sean Harwood because of my interest in what's happening with the Nordic extension, and I talked to him Saturday, and again, maybe this was mentioned and I just missed it, but he tells me that, what was his name?
James Coleman?
Yeah. What was his first name again?
James.
He pulled that project back in March.
Yeah, he did.
I hadn't heard that. So when I talked to Sean, he actually said that he would come and talk to citizens in the city if they wanted to be, kind of up to date on that. But it sounds like other people are aware of it. And as I mentioned, I may not have been here that night, but
it was in the newspaper.
Oh, it was? Yeah. I don't read the newspaper.
I think we did mention it one night in council meeting in closing comments, but it was, a one sentence, hey, it's been pulled.
Well, and I may not have been here that night. Last but not least, I talked to Dave about the UDOT situation on 2000. Do we have any resolve on that yet?
No. Maybe Chief. What we understand that UDOT's not going to allow it.
We can't even put up a sign just to warn people about turning
far as the crosswalk itself, that's not going to be, or we're not going to be able to do that. It's on 2000 that we talked about.
Yeah, well, we were talking about maybe putting up a sign maybe before the cannery or something that just indicated a caution for turning onto 2000.
Yeah, to watch pedestrians, and that's something that we can do as far as public works. But yeah, as far as the crosswalk itself, it's out.
So we can't go back and paint the one crosswalk that has since, the one that we can't. Why?
Just walk to the light.
UDOT has jurisdiction within so many feet of their controlled intersections.
Wasn't it 300? 300 feet is what Dave told me, as I recall.
Yeah, it's something like 300 feet from there. We basically have to go 100 yards all the way up 2,000 before we can put a crosswalk in.
Huh. So how soon could we get something? Because I know the people that own the creamery are just continuing to be concerned about that. So wonder how soon we could maybe get that taken care of.
I'll get with Chief and we can.
Something there that would.
I think the problem is that with the semaphore, they're just within a short distance, and the safety of crossing with the semaphore, you take that away by giving them another option. I mean, we can put all the signs up we want, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to have somebody turn that corner and either find you or that car engages pedestrians in the middle of the road with little to no warning. And I think that's where the 300-foot rule kind of gives us that, that much of a distance to create some warning.
Okay. Well, if you could just look into it and decide collectively, that would be great, what we might be able to do. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Barker?
Yeah, one thing, I stopped today and saw our public works sewer people working with their truck. That's an impressive truck.
The Vector.
Yeah, yeah. That's pretty cool what it can do. If anyone's curious, go find that truck and watch what they can do. It smells great too. But it's an impressive piece of machinery we have. I'm glad it's here.
Anything else?
Nope.
Thank you.
That's it.
Councilman Swanson?
Just two quick items. One, now that Pleasant View seems to be in the spirit of splitting costs appropriately, could we look at splitting the costs of their use of the senior center? A lot of their residents use that senior center, and North Ogden foots the bill. Every penny of it. They do donate $5,000 a year to the senior organization for their crafts and their activities and those kinds of things, but North Ogden ponies up $50,000-$60,000 a year for the utilities and the upkeep and the landscaping and everything else. We'll be paying the cost of the expansion of the parking lot. I've brought this up before, and now that we're appropriately splitting the costs on our city engineer, I think it's time that we also look at appropriately splitting the costs of the senior center and all of the maintenance and everything else that goes along with it.
Okay. We will reach out to them.
And the other issue, the only other thing I have is Mountain View Park would be a great place for the movies in the park. I know at least one individual that lives right next to the park that would love to have it there.
What's his name?
You're looking at him.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Councilwoman Stoker?
Nope.
Okay. John?
I feel like there's something, but just so we haven't done a major project update because we haven't had council meetings on the first week of the month. I don't think we're planning to have one this coming month. So when would you like the next report? Do you want to wait till August if we do a work session, or do you want me to try and put it in one of the July meetings?
Does it have to be during the work session, or you just do it during normal council?
We can do it during a normal meeting. We just had historically said we'll do it the first, at the work session because we were holding them pretty regularly. So just want to see what the council's preference is.
I'd like July.
Okay.
If we have a meeting with nothing on it.
Okay. And with that, council, if you're okay, I'm also going to try and include a development portion of that as well, saying here's the projects that are, being talked about or where we're at on them. A good example is that North Cove project that seems, it's a little like Jaws. It kind of pops up and then disappears for a while and then pops up. And so maybe we, just keep you updated on where we're at, what the staff's heard about it and things like that. So.
It's like Jaws. I like that.
Annette?
Just one thing, with the elections going on and all the candidates, I've been here almost 18 years, and this is my 9th election. I just want you to know that the city does not sponsor debates. Other organizations do it. We stay completely out of it. It's usually the Kiwanis or another group. It can be the candidates that put together one, but the city will not sponsor one.